Isaac, over to you. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me today. It's I've not really done talks before. I usually write blogs about these sort of subjects, but I'm a short film maker. I was fortunate enough to win the BFI Network Best Film in 2022, a Best Short Film. And I've also been fortunate enough to produce a comedy short with Dame Emma Thompson, who was executive producer on that. So I want to be kind of clear from the start. I'm coming from this from the point of view of someone who's not reached like great success in their career, but still very much working things out, still navigating the industry, and still encountering its limitations and contradictions as well as I go. So very much kind of coming in this from someone that's still in the first sort of, I think about 5 years now since graduating. And yeah, working out as I go along. But I feel it's important to hear and have discussions from people of all different parts of the industry. A lot of the time, most conversations about film careers are kind of from the position of people who already have made it, with the kind of the hindsight of that and the access that they've already gained. Where I think a lot of the people tend to be coming in at a stance where they don't really know many people, um, on sort of in a general sense that work within the industry. So hearing and kind of discussing these things from this point of view of um, early sort of year access into the industry, I think is very important. So yeah, I think if we can, yeah, I'm going to start with that film really does remain a relationship-driven industry. That's not unique and it's not inherently malicious. Film production is freelance, high pressure, and financially risky. So people hire quickly. They often do so under stress, and the default feels safe. So hiring people they know is the natural way to kind of ensure that you're hiring someone that isn't going to mess up your production and lose a lot of money. So the problem is that safety often maps into familiarity, and familiarity tends to reflect existing social and economic advantage. In the UK, the data is consistent. Working class people make up roughly a quarter of the regional workforce. In film and television, representation is closer to 8%, so considerably less. That discrepancy isn't explained by talent or effort, it's explained by access. Who can afford unpaid work, who lives near production hubs, and who has informal introductions, and who can take the risk without having the immediate financial consequences. So having those periods in between jobs of sometimes months where you don't have a job and you're trying to find the next job. And I think that's particularly common in the early years when you're first trying to get a foot in the door and make that way. So when the industry relies heavily on informal trust networks, inequality doesn't need to be enforced; it reproduces itself. So really, this talk exists because pretending that access is evenly distributed doesn't help people try to build careers with unequal conditions. So yeah, making progress without existing access. Early career film work is assessed less on promise and more on evidence. Um, that's not always fair, but it is consistent. People are rarely hired because they work, because they might be capable. They're hired because they can demonstrate an ability to complete work, collaborate under pressure, and solve problems without supervision. It's just proving that you're not going to lose this production money and that you are a reliable person. So having that evidence of work behind you is what is it's a similar thing in lots of industries. If you don't have experience, how do you get the experience necessary to do it if they're not going to let you in without that experience? It's a vicious cycle. But this is why finished work matters more than ambitious plans. That doesn't have to be that you've got a credit on a big blockbuster studio film. It's proving that you have the perseverance to continue making short films, which is always, of course, like the entry level into filmmaking. Very few people go straight onto feature film sets without having that experience of experimenting with shorts and music videos and things like that. So yeah, that can look like short films, small documentaries, limited projects, and these can work not as calling cards but as proof of follow through. Um, One useful way to think about early output is progression rather than quality. Obviously, we always want to strive for quality, but the first project. So if you see it as each project teaches you something. So the first project can teach you how to finish something, and this is, of course, maybe if you're coming in from it from a very new stance. I'm sure some of you have kind of done more than your fair share of short films, but if you're seeing it from the complete beginning stance, the first project can teach you how to finish something. The second teaches you how to work with others, so that collaboration, which is so key within film and creative industries in general. And then the third can teach you how to take responsibility, how to take that leadership, which is particularly important if you're looking to more of a producing, directing, or like head of department role, which can come later in careers. But having that experience and learning curves are so important. Each stage reduces perceived risk for the next person who considers working with you. So again, the more experience you have, the less risk that is perceived from the higher. Um, the reduction of risk is often more important than originality. Um, Obviously, you want to be original with your work and as creative as possible, but in terms of actually getting employed, um, ideally, you can do both. But it's that sort of reduction of risk which is so important, especially when budgets are tight or even when they're not tight. It's all about sort of limiting the loss of money. And then there's the importance of relationships over just networking. So networking implies exchange, that you're going to give me something and I'll give you something, where relationships imply more continuity. In practice, people hire those they trust to behave predictably under pressure. That trust is built through shared experience rather than introductions. Um, and most sustainable careers aren't built through large contact lists. They're built through a small number of repeated collaborations. So it's building that trust up. And of course, networking is so important. But instead of just scattergunning and trying to get to know as many people as possible and spending a little here and a little there, I think it's much more beneficial to think about what areas you're not as strong in and the roles within a crew that you would like to eventually fill. So if you're building up your film crew, in theory, for instance, I have done producing on multiple projects, but it's not what I enjoy, and it's not my strongest area. I prefer writing and directing. So you go out to a networking event and eventually try and find, and that might take a year, it might take 6 months, 2 months, and find someone who you work well with, and is usually at the same sort of level as you, ideally slightly more advanced, but someone that's already won BAFTAs and that isn't going to be that interested in producing a film necessarily that I have written. But so yeah, finding people that are on the same sort of similar level to you. Um, so that question shapes far more hiring decisions than um, what is usually acknowledged. And the question being, is that person talented, but not is that person talented, but would I want to work with them again if things go wrong? So it's that, will I want to work with them again? That's the most important thing, and proving that to that network around you. And then momentum as a more useful metric than status. Titles, credits, and visible markers of success arrive late and unevenly. So momentum arrives earlier. That's something you can control, that momentum. That's how am I going to deliver? How regularly am I going to deliver? Momentum looks like skills gradually improving, outputs becoming more regular, and work leading to further work. This often is invisible, but internally it is measurable. Um, Tracking momentum rather than comparing status. So this helps maintain perspective in an industry where outcomes are delayed and feedback is inconsistent. So it's again, yeah, kind of making sure that that momentum is going, and you're building up that trust. I think it all comes back to trust. People who people who last are often the most confident, or are often sorry, people who last are often not the most confident, but they're the most recognized early on. But the ones whose trajectory continues moving even and slowly. So I bumbled that sentence, sorry. But in terms of, yeah, the people that are most confident and most loud at the very beginning might be noticed and recognized early on, but will they be consistent and um, have their career growing? And it's that sort of even momentum, just chipping away at the block until you've got that little diamond, and that's your career that you built up. I hope that made sense. Film productions operate as temporary organizations, so teams assemble quickly, work intensely, and disperse. There is limited time to assess people formally, so informal trust substitutes for process. I think this is why so often film productions will just always hire on word of mouth. So your head of department may have worked with this team that you're a part of, and they say, right, I've got this job. I don't have time to vet and hire everyone from scratch each production. And to be honest, why would they? So we're going to go with that trusted team, or if there's a role they need to fill, someone that is in that team, someone they know might be able to come in. So it's again the word of mouth. So it makes sense in terms of ease for them, but it does exclude people. So from a production standpoint, it does make sense. But from an access standpoint, it does create problems. When trust networks overlap with class, geography, and family background opportunity clusters, London dominates, of course. And even though there's initiatives out there to diversify where films are produced and where studios are built, still the cluster of studios are around London, and it is very London centric. But again, you can kind of see why if it's the capital and ease, but it does create little hurdles for people that might not be either close to London, or even worse, if you're not close to London, you can't afford to come close to London. So breaking into these networks without proximity or prior connection requires alternative forms of validation, often through visible work, third-party schemes, or repeated grassroots collaboration. This doesn't eliminate inequality, but it can partially counterbalance it. And I think that's where the internet can come in to such use, because you can share your short films online, you can share them on social media, and you can be experimental with how you market yourself and your films. And I think that's something that's potentially underlooked, to try and get the word of your films out there in terms of turning your short film into reels or snippets to tease it, and really thinking a bit like a marketer, which is again having to kind of wear all the different hats that is so regular when you're just starting out and you're trying to get your foot in the door. But then there's of course schemes, and charities. Um, there's a couple that I know, which I'll speak about most because I know the most about them. There's Screen Skills. Now, Screen Skills operates as more of an industry infrastructure rather than a patronage. It isn't primarily about three aimless grants, recognition, or symbolic support. It's about maintaining practical systems that allow the screen sector to function. The organization sits in the space between education and employment, transitioning industry leads into structured entry routes that productions can realistically use. So this is for instance, at the moment, they're focusing on things like training people into accountancy for film and also AI adoption within in cinema, because those are two areas that they can predict that need have holes and need filling within the next year. So focusing really much on the areas of the industry that need upskilling and training and bridging that gap between the education and then the employment within film. So this looks like paid placements, occupational standards training, so that's that training again, and bursaries. And this makes hiring early career workers less financially and logically risky for productions. Film and television operate on tight schedules, tight margins, and high consequences for mistakes. Bringing in someone completely untested can slow departments down for increased supervision costs. Screen Skills reduces that friction by standardizing expectations, underwriting part of the cost, and signaling that baseline entry level of training and readiness has already been met. So they know if they're hiring you, you're not going in completely blind and don't really know what you're doing. And there's still stories where people come in through Screen Skills, which is incredibly over applied, and there's obviously not a massive amount of places that they can give. They do their best, but there's not a lot of spaces compared to the amount of applicants. And sometimes people have got through. I know from a friend of mine who did Screen Skills, and then someone else in her group who also came through Screen Skills um, wasn't very well trained, but I think, or they weren't very ready, and that can just be down to personality. But they try their best to make sure that a level of basic training and readiness has already been met. So when the production brings you on, they're not taking as big of a risk. So for individuals, the value isn't prestige, it's legitimacy. A Screen Skills recognized pathway signals that someone understands how sets function in practice, not just in theory. It shows that being filtered through a system that the industry has at least partially designed for itself. In an industry where hiring often happens through networks and reputation, formal legitimacy can substitute for personal connections, at least at the entry point. For employers, it's reassurance, like I mentioned. It lowers the perceived risk of taking on someone without an extensive credits list. It also helps justify hiring decisions internally, particularly on larger productions where heads of department must account for budget and efficiency to producers and financiers. That combination matters, and that matters because the screen industries are often freelance network driven and risk aware by nature. So mechanisms that reduce uncertainty on both sides for new entrants trying to access work and for employers trying to protect production schedules becomes structural and not operational. Screen Skills functions less like a grant giving body and more like a piece of shared infrastructure that keeps talent pipelines unusable in real world productions and conditions. So then the next one's the BFI. This is somewhere where I have more of a personal experience with. Obviously, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I got the BFI Network Best Film for 2020, the short film for 2022. That was my graduation film. So I'm a little bit more aware with kind of how they function. But yeah, the BFI initiatives, sorry, functions quite similar to screen skills. So, like screen skills, they're often misunderstood simply as funding bodies handing out money to filmmakers. In reality, they operate much closer to ecosystem builders, shaping how talent enters, develops, and stays within the UK screen industry over time. Funding, and this can be like through funding, mentoring, and network support. And this doesn't replace industry navigation, they scaffold it. So it's giving that support throughout the industry. They don't remove the need to rebuild build relationships, understand set culture, or learn new commissioning, how commissioning really works. What they do is create structured moments where people who might otherwise never cross paths with decision makers, producers, or development executives can do so in a legitimate and recognized environment. So that can look like networking events just for that. So, for instance, the BFI network, which is a program that exists within the BFI, they have networking events where you can go and meet with other like-minded professionals within the industry that you might not have met before. Um, and they often try to target people from lower income backgrounds and outside of London, just to try and diversify the pool of talent. But yes, so they provide structure where informal systems dominate. So in an informal industry, they add a bit more structure. The film is still heavily and film is still heavily informal, as I mentioned. Jobs are rarely advertised. Crews are often built through recommendation chains. Development opportunities are frequently shared privately without intervention. Those informal systems tend to recycle the same social groups, not necessarily because of deliberate exclusion, but because of speed, trust, and familiarity. Um, BFI schemes effectively interrupt that loop. They create points where selection is based more on work, potential, and voice than proximity to existing networks. That doesn't eliminate bias or structural inequality, but it introduces a bit of friction against it. And this matters, and friction matters in a system like this where it's so easy to fall into the status quo. Because even if because if a small percentage of opportunities are distributed through structured access routes rather than purely relationship-based ones, over time, you start to see different kinds of filmmakers entering the pipeline, and having different voices is vital. Because without that diversity of background, films and TV will become increasingly stagnant, with stories being told kind of all becoming alike. The points of views being so similar, the stories will, of course, start to stagnate and become similar too. Um, and just be less authentic if they are trying to tell a story that the writer hasn't had firsthand accounts of or experience with. So increased representation of working class creatives within funded projects suggests that when access mechanisms are formalized, outcomes change, not instantly and not evenly across all areas of the industry, but sorry, but noticeably, I can't say that word. You know the word I mean. Noticeably enough to track over time. When application processes are transparent, when eligibility criteria are clear, and when uh, assessment is done through panels rather than purely through informal recommendation, the pool automatically widens. Not radically, because structural change in creative industries is slow, and funding alone cannot solve housing costs, freelance instability, or long-term retention. But measurably, you see incremental shifts. in who gets early development money, who gets mentored, and who gets introduced to commissioning rooms. And those early career moments do compound. And I think kind of we're already seeing through some of the things the BFI are doing that their films in particular, their funding, are showing a wider points of views, wider backgrounds, wider stories, which I think makes for much more interesting cinema and TV, well, cinema with the BFI. Um, but another important part of the BFI support is that it often operates across multiple stages of a career rather than just at entry level. Development funds lead to production funding. Production funding can lead to festival exposure, and festival exposure can lead to sales agents, distributors, out or broadcasts taking interest. That continuity is important because access without progression doesn't actually change the shape of an industry. It just changes who gets to try it briefly. And obviously, that's more towards features than shorts. So this is kind of they do have a short film fund as well, but a lot of that is a little bit more towards the feature side of things. But there's also a signaling effect. BFI backing functions as a form of industry shorthand. It tells producers, commissioners, and collaborators that a project or filmmaker has passed through a level of scrutiny aligned with national industry standards in a freelance sector built on trust signals that carries weight. It doesn't guarantee work, but it operates but it opens conversations that might otherwise never happen. And then at a broader level, BFI initiatives also shape industry behavior indirectly. When funding criteria includes diversity standards, fair pay requirements, or training expectations, productions adjust their practices to remain eligible. So over time, that shifts norms, not through enforcement alone, but through incentive. Um, so the long-term value of the BFI intervention isn't just about individual filmmakers getting projects made. It's about stabilizing parts of the talent pipeline that would otherwise be which would otherwise be almost entirely dependent on social capital. It creates points where industry has to stop and look outside its usual circles, even only briefly, if only briefly. Um, and when you look historically at how creative industries change, it's rarely through sudden transformation. It's through repeated small structural corrections applied consistently over time. I think that applies to change across most industries and in sort of the wider world. That small little um, tactical changes can create the bigger change. So when people ask whether funding schemes fix inequality, I think that's the wrong question. They don't fix it, but they do something arguably more realistic. They create measurable counter pressure against systems that would otherwise become more closed over time. And in an industry where access is often determined by proximity, even small structural openings can change the trajectory of who ends up staying long enough to build a career. And then there's one that I don't really know a massive amount about, but I thought I'd put it in anyway, which is the Film and TV Charity and also Arts Emergency. So these organizations tend to be less visible, but they're definitely not any less important. They don't accelerate careers, but they prevent collapse. So they are there to offer support when burnout, financial instability, and mental health strain are which are massive side effects for people working in the film industry with the amount of hours, the financial instability. So they offer a lifeline basically when people are really struggling, they can't support themselves, work might not be coming in. They did a lot of support during COVID and also within strikes. They make sure that talent doesn't disappear suddenly and they give their, yeah, that lifeline. So that's more for people kind of working in the industry that might be finding themselves needing a bit of a lifeline. That's the Film and TV Charity and Arts Emergency. Um, so then going on to kind of when passion stops being helpful. The idea that film work should be sustained by passion alone is persistent and quite damaging. Passion doesn't compensate for instability. It doesn't offer for it doesn't. Sorry. So it's been a very long day. Passion doesn't compensate for instability. It doesn't offset long hours, unpaid labor, or chronic uncertainty. Um, for instance, my brother, who is a first unit desk op within lighting, on quite big feature films, studio things like Marvel and stuff like that. He's currently working on a production, and he's doing 16-hour days on average, 6 days a week. That's including his drive to work, but still, very long days, very tiring, and it's easy to see how that's not healthy and it's not sustainable. So having passion alone is not the answer. It's important, but it's not the only thing that's important. In practice, those who survive the longest are often those with external financial or emotional safety nets. And acknowledging this isn't cynical, it's realistic. Framing exploitation as dedication makes it harder to discuss sustainability. And sustainability is the real challenge in film, not entry. So many people that it's an industry where so many people enter, eventually after a few years will pull out because they just can't handle the hours, the stress of it, and all of those factors that we've discussed. So there needs to be more discussion and support for making the industry more sustainable. And then there's, of course, future pressures. So technological change, particularly AI, will disproportionately affect entry-level roles. Some tasks will disappear, others will change, and new forms of work will emerge. The risk is not automation itself, but uneven protection during transition. And I think it's that thing that's key, making sure that if entry-level pathways narrow further without replacement structures, access will become more restricted, not less. Um, and the response needs to be structural rather than reactive. We need to ensure that entry level training and upskilling of those already in the industry and those entering covers the predictable implementations of AI in film workflows. So making sure that training is kind of preparing those in the industry and those entering the industry the relevant skills to use AI, that their roles aren't out of date or replaced. So what actually needs to change? We need access initiatives without long-term employment models simply delay attrition. That's not right, but what's needed are clearer pipelines, paid entry career roles, and transparency around hiring and progression. Um, Without this, the industry continues to rely on individual resilience rather than collaborative responsibility, and that approach is unsustainable and exclusionary of those from poorer backgrounds and with less financial support. So, kind of a little to kind of close this up. If you don't have industry connections, that isn't a personal failing. It's a start. It's a starting condition, and starting conditions influence pace, not potential. Film benefits from people who arrive without inherited access, not despite the fact, but because of it. Different perspectives tend to emerge from different constraints, and the challenge isn't proving worth, it's staying long enough for worth to become visible. But yeah. Yeah, that's me. Sorry, I hope that made sense. I feel like I bumbled quite a few times. I started work at 5 this morning, so I'm getting a little bit steamy. So I do apologize, but hopefully that was clear, and I can take as many questions as you have.
Well done, Isaac. That was really fascinating. And don't worry about starting early. As we've said, that's just the nature of whatever you do, whether it's film, non-film, that is just the nature of life. So you do your work and then you come in to do your promotion afterwards. So very well done on that. Does anyone have a question for Isaac uh, off the bat? Any thoughts? I can't see any questions in the chat, so I will use my chair privilege and go the first one. So yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. 3 points that stuck out to me straight away where when you said look at the projects you do, the videos, and look at learning something different or training a specific skill with each video, which I know probably sounds obvious, but it's something that you've got to be really intentional about. This week I'm doing a video and I'm doing this. Next week I'm doing this because after 52 weeks in a year, suddenly all those things that you've built up, and if you promote them or push them out online, you have an online record with people seeing that you're consistent, you can do something regularly over days, weeks, months, and even years. So that really stuck out. The momentum arrives early. Yeah, absolutely. Because you need to get going. And once you get going, it takes a long time for something to happen. And then things tend to happen at once. So that consistency is so important. And the third thing about the organizations and using these legitimate organizations to give you a bit of a boost to sidestep the fact that you don't have any direct connections. I thought those were really, really important. What have you found out of all the things you've mentioned has been the most something that you think you should do this now? You know, for people just starting out, because you've said a lot of things that if they could just do one thing,
Mm.
what do you think?
I would say you say one thing, but two things come to mind. But
Go
I'll
for it.
say both if that's okay. But I'll start in terms of priority. I would say just making like practicing your skill. So whether that's making films as a director, often your first films you do a bit of everything. I still do often a bit of everything, and
Mm,
as I said at the beginning of the talk, I'm very much kind of still very early doors with my career. But making sure that every film that you do, especially with short films, it's not something that money can be made from. So you need to be getting something out of it because it's an investment. It's an investment in your portfolio. It's a financial investment. The thousands I've spent doing films from savings over the years, and something I've of course been sort of fortunate enough to be able to do. But it's there's a lot of big investments you put into it. So you need to be getting something out of it.
mm,
So making sure that you're learning something from every film, and not just kind of making a film and forgetting about it. So I quite like to reflect at the end of each film, kind of what did I mess up on, what could have been improved, what would I do differently each time. So learning something from every film, I would say is a very key thing. So you're definitely getting something out of short films, other than obviously the ever important building up your portfolio. Um, but then the other thing that comes to mind is being more controlled with your networking. It's something that over the years, the sort of countless networking events I've been to, you meet so many people,
mm,
and none of them, on the majority of them, you don't see again, and aren't the most beneficial to your career because you're not seeing them again, you're getting nothing out of it. And networking doesn't have to be in person as much as it is great to be in person. It can just be sort of targeting people through LinkedIn connection requests and then
mm,
dropping them a message and getting to know them. One of my close friends, I met on LinkedIn about 2 years ago, and he's an amazing writer director, like multi-award winning. His name's Matt Hansen. Look at his film Voiceless is doing really well at the moment. Um, but yeah, so making sure that if I'm not a strong producer, the people I'm looking to network with will be producers at the level. So building up that crew and being targeted, and not just only being friends and networking with just people that do exactly the same thing as you. Because when it comes to doing a film, then you're going to have a very one-sided crew with not much functionality.
Brilliant 2 points. Yes, you were ready for that one. We've got a great question from Lizzie. How could you improve skills with a low budget? So a lot of materials are very expensive. So
Mm.
how can you do that? Like when you need to practice with different types, is there a way that you recommend?
Yes, I think it depends on what area, and jump in and say what sort of area you're kind of wanting to improve, and what sort of roles within film you're interested in. But I think we are very fortunate that we have things like phones, and it doesn't have to be like the latest iPhone. In fact, my iPhone, I've got like it was about a 10-year-old iPhone. But you can still shoot stuff. You can plan, practice, camera work and editing. Amazing, yeah. So obviously you want to get practice using the best cameras you can. And there are things like it depends on age, but there's things like the BFI Academy,
Mm.
which have lots of workshops in person. Um, so they have like equipment and stuff that you can use in those workshops. But in terms of practical skills, of like editing, using things like your phone and shooting mini shorts, on your phone, and then putting them into like a free editing software. Like DaVinci Resolve is phenomenal. And a lot of big feature productions now. For instance, my brother, who I mentioned earlier in the talk, he's on a lot of Marvel and stuff like that, and they use DaVinci Resolve. That's what they use. They use the paid version, but to be honest, the paid version doesn't have many things that the free version doesn't have.
Mm.
So free softwares like that are key. And then just trying to, yeah, meet up with other like-minded people. So if you can't necessarily afford to, as most people can't, buy lots of different cameras and play around, kind of meeting up with other people and trading skills and being like, you've got this camera. Do you want to meet up and we can play around and experiment and learn from each other and just also have a bit of fun? And that can be through things like groups on social media, LinkedIn. You kind of meet those people, just kind of outreaching to people and trying to do as much as possible. But there's lots of like free courses and stuff, or cheap subsidized courses through things like the BFI Academy. So if you look those up online, you'll get a whole list
Yeah.
of those.
I've just put the DaVinci Resolve
Oh,
link to
brilliant.
DaVinci Resolve in the chat. I agree. That's what I use. It's brilliant, and the fact that it's free as well, you can do
Mm.
so much with it. Like you said, you only come across things if you need like multiple effects on the same thing with some of
Yeah.
them, but you don't need them. You can do some really good stuff. So yeah, that's a great suggestion. Uh, and any other questions? Oh, there we go. It's Alex. Hello, what do you think is the best way to find actors or crew members that will want to be part of a student-led short film?
So obviously it's something we've all done a lot, or I've done lots trying to like when you're doing especially student films and you've got zero budget, and so when I did it, I used a lot of ads on things like Mandy is a great website,
Mm.
or Facebook groups. Facebook groups I wasn't so keen on because you get a lot of abuse. Um, yeah, I actually, I won't, I can't remember his name, but he was a CBBC actor that I knew as I watched as a kid, and then sent a very long message when I did a message saying I'm looking for an actor to be in this film. It's student production. Travel and food will be covered, but we can't pay any fees. And then I got this essay of a comment, um, just kind of uh, saying that I was taking advantage and I was a bad person, in less polite language. But it was quite funny because it was from someone I watched growing up as a kid. But yeah, so Facebook groups do exist, but you have to have a thick skin because you will always get a handful of comments per ad that are saying stop taking advantage of actors. But I think if you can always just cover travel and food expenses, it doesn't need to be, it can be pizzas and pasta, even though my teacher always said don't do carbs because actors get sleepy on them. But Yeah, things like, but Mandy's really good because it tends to be a more professional set
Mm.
of actors. So my first call's always Mandy, and you can advertise on there for free. And it has a lovely dashboard as well. So all the applicants come through. You can put them into groups. Um, and I've got a lot of actors through there. And eventually you'll build up a network of actors. Like I quite like working with the same actors that I use on different films, and um, you'll eventually, yeah, build up a network that either work with you for portfolio work, or I now, if I do a production, I can pay like smaller sort of fees. Obviously, I've not got massive budgets or very much zero budgets, that trying to, and sometimes just write films to be affordable. It might not sound the most exciting thing, but write short film scripts that don't need a massive cast. It can be a one-person production or a two-person. And a lot of universities that do film will also have drama courses attached, so you can also reach out to them. And if they don't, just reach out to other drama schools in the area, and they'll always be happy to work and be on a production because it's they're at the exact same stage of their career as you.
Yeah, some very good tips. And yes, I would just like to reiterate, please do ignore anyone who says a nasty comment like that on Facebook. They're just bitter and sour. So
Yeah.
that's before I get
You
too
have to have
into
a
that.
thick skin and laugh.
Yeah, just have a thick skin and laugh. But yeah, if you need anything like that, do put it out to me, and I can put out feelers through Reading Film and Video Makers. We've obviously got connections with different local groups, and as long as you give them a credit, or it's normally, as with this, it's just good opportunity for people to gain experience. So yes, definitely reach out and let us know. Thank you, Alex, for that question. Any other questions? Not now. Well, that gives me an opportunity because I wanted to ask you, Isaac, you mentioned your 2022 short film that won the BFI. Could you say a bit more about that and your own process for doing that, how you did it? Because obviously it won the BFI, so it must have you must have done well with it.
Yeah, no, so it was a short film, just over 10 minutes, which is often a good sweet spot for films because if they're going to festivals and things, they're not going to want to watch loads of long films. So the shorter the better for short films. But it was about the film was a sort of psychological thriller drama about a man who, while grieving the death of his wife, develops a mental illness, a real mental illness called clinical lycanthropy,
Mm.
which is where the person, it's often connected to schizophrenia, and the person believes they can become an animal, most commonly dogs, hence lycanthropy. But my guy thought he could be a cat. So it was this sort of uh, quite grotesque. Story of, and but very sad, of a man kind of living in squalor and getting worse, and the effects that that has on his relationships with his family. But I think I got lucky in the sense that it was quite an odd storyline, and so it stood out a little bit that it was something that was a little bit different, which I think is always usual. Always helpful. It's called Purr. It's on my website as well. It's
Yeah,
just
I'll link in the email that I send out the link
thank
to
you.
Isaac's website, and yeah, I will make a note specifically to put the link to Per. Really?
But
On the back of that, what was your, it sounds like it was fairly, I won't say easy because I know everything is hard. It sounds fairly straightforward. If it's someone living in squalor, you can control the room that you use. So it doesn't sound like it was too intense production wise.
hmm.
How did you go about doing that? Was it just the one man? So that was your focus on the one man and you had one room? What was the detail over how you went about filming it?
Yeah, so we crowdfunded it in terms of funding. We got a grand and a half together, so still talking very minimal budgets for films and shorts. But it was three actors and myself because it's again student films and you have to stand in. So I had a non-speaking role, and took part. But it was the one actor was in the majority of it, and then there was two scenes with a female actor playing his wife, and then there was the son, um, and I was playing the son's partner in that. So there was four characters, three actors, and myself, and a rubber baby doll. But it was all
Did you
very, yeah,
edit
very kind
it?
of. So no, I didn't edit. So it was my graduation film. So the my course had a pathway for writing, directing, producing, which was my pathway, and then they had an editing pathway and a cinematography pathway. So it was split up into quite a nice section where every production had like a cinematographer, editor,
Hmm.
and then us. Um, but no, it was good, and it was very much like all short films in particular, particularly student ones, all hands on deck. Like I remember making the cat food tins. And making up this horrible concoction of cat food that was edible, but it wasn't tasty for humans. And the poor actor had to sit on the floor, uh, eating out of a tin of like it was like a mixture of jelly and beans and things, and food dye. It's horrific. But the guy was a very an incredible actor. Like he's been lots of small parts on things like Bond and stuff. But just one of those kind of phenomenal actors that hasn't had a massive break, which is all too common, sadly.
Absolutely fascinating. So it goes to show, make friends with people who are, they have a different set of skills to you. Like you said, you
Mm.
didn't do the editing, but you know someone who did the editing. There was someone that did cinematography. So yeah, have your range of key people that you know. I think that's really good. And also know what you have to offer. Because if you can go to someone and say, anyone, I can do a short film for your, a short promo video for your website if they have their own business. And in exchange, can you give me? So yeah, bartering, I think is really good.
100%. Yeah, I think it's all about collaboration.
Brilliant. Thank you, Isaac. Any more questions before we close off? It's been an hour. Uh, Absolutely flown that. Any final thoughts, comments, or questions? No? Okay. Well, just to finish off then, like I said, we will send the recording of the video around. I'll do that end of this week, Friday, more than likely Saturday. That would include a link to the landing page as well as Isaac's website and details and the link to Per, which I'm very intrigued now. I'm going to go and watch. If any of you would like to be added to the Reading Film and Video Makers list, do let me know. If you have any projects, as you said, that you're working on, you need help, feel free to reach out. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help filmmakers develop and, yeah, do what they do best, basically. So, Isaac, thank you so much for your time. This has been brilliant. And yeah, look forward to seeing the recording, which I'll go and edit now on DaVinci Resolve, I'll just add.